What's up, everybody? Welcome back. I wanted to start the show today by reading something that just struck me, as something that was pretty relevant today. And it's a quote from George Carlin, who, passed away, when was it? 2008, and died on my birthday in 2008. So here it goes. That's all you'll ever hear about this country. It's our differences. That's all the media and the politicians are ever talking about. The things that separate us, things that make us different from one another. That's the way the ruling class operates in any society. They try to divide the rest of the people. They keep the lower and the middle classes fighting with each other so that they, the rich, can run off with all the fucking money. George Carlin. So, I wanted to read that because you guys have probably noticed, at least if you've followed me for a little while, that a lot of my messaging is about we the people speaking truth to power. And it's not about white or black or man or woman or gay or straight or any of that. I mean, those are obviously identifiers that people use and that people certainly are proud of in various capacities. But it's truly more about us as the American people versus them. The ruling class, the folks who find themselves in positions of power, the people who jockey for these positions of power, and they really couldn't care less about you and I and everyone else who makes up the lifeblood of this country and truly spends day in and day out working to provide for our families and to build a better future for our families and our children and our communities. And that's what Carlin was getting at. And in order for them to continue to achieve that, they have to keep us divided. I posted a sign where I was holding up a sign saying, they want us to hate each other. Don't let them win. And it went, kind of viral, circulated around a little bit, but it's true. They need us to hate each other. They need us to stay divided. They need this conflict that's stirred up by woke ideology and pushing this racial divide between people, because it's the analogy I like to use is it's like when you have a pit of alligators. If you guys ever used to watch Crocodile Hunter or any shows like that, you've seen where they feed the alligators or the crocodiles and they throw the meat down there and they're all going at it, right? And that's sort of what it's like with the ruling class and the people. They'll toss out something divisive and then we're all fighting on it and they're over here lining their pockets. So we need to unify. We're going to have differences. And that's another one of my key messages. It was the original signpost that I made. I said, we can disagree and still be friends. Of course, I caught a lot of crap for it. A lot of people were immediately going to the extremes about, well, not if you're a racist or this or that or the other. And it's like, yes, of course, there are absolutely deal breakers in terms of who you're willing to be friends with. But for the most part, we have so much more in common than we have differences. And we need to remember that. And we need to come together because that's the only way we're going to move forward. We can't stay divided like this, although that's what they would love for us to do. So I wanted to start the show off with that quote from Carlin because I think it's very poignant today and very relevant to what's going on. Also, I have to apologize if you're watching the video content. I am wearing a tank top. It's because I'm getting ready to work out, and I was already getting changed and taking my pre-workout and stuff, and I needed to sit down and do the show. So I apologize for my exposed arms here. One thing that I was thinking about that I've noticed in watching a lot of the coverage lately of the Biden administration, and specifically the Biden administration in the context of his and Kamala's approval ratings continuing to plummet. And that taken in conjunction with what's happened in Virginia, and that taken in conjunction with what's happened in New Jersey and all these other places where we've had elections and things have really sort of moved to the right and gone red in a lot of ways. New Jersey, of course, pushed to the right strongly, but it was already a very blue state, so it looks like they're going to eke that one out. However, it's undeniable that there's been a tide change. And so there's been a lot of rhetoric about that in the media. And even in the sources that I really like, the sources that I usually will go to consume news, they talk about the discontent of the country insofar as the performance of the president goes, always in the context of, well, things aren't going to be looking good for midterms, or, he better get his ratings up. He still has a little time if he wants to get reelected or run again, or, it's always talked about in that context instead of what does it mean for the country? Why don't we talk about what it means for the country? Who cares about his chances to run again? Or who cares about there being a shot for Republicans to take the House when we're talking about the state of our nation right now? You have 38% approval rating or whatever the hell it is right now for the president of the United States. And all you're talking about are elections next year, right? Or in 2022. Why don't you talk about what that means for our country? What is going on in our country? There's a reason the approval rating is so low. There's a reason that Kamala, or however you want to say her name, has such a low approval rating. There's a reason that Virginia went red. And instead of talking about those things, it always shifts to this conversation about the next popularity contest. It's like, why don't we talk about what the hell is going on in the country and the state of affairs in the nation? And I know that a lot of these shows are political, so they're going to have a political bent. But come on, who the fuck cares about midterms? Like, let's talk about what's good for the country. And that's one of the things that drives me nuts is immediately you see, no matter what the party, right now it's Democrats because they're the ones losing their grip on power. They're talking in terms of losing or regaining control as though that's the objective. Well, what about the well-being of the American people? Why isn't that the objective we talk about? Why are we immediately talking about, oh, it's a lose for Democrats, or it's a win for Republicans, or a win for Democrats? Or it's like, shut up. What is it for the American people? That's what matters. That's what we care about. So why are we going on and on and on about what it means for Democrats? And why Democrats are sad because they lost this governor's seat. Well, how about be happy that the American people spoke up and got what they wanted? And let's talk about what it means for the American people. No, instead you want to push fake narratives of white supremacy and cry about losing your grip on power. It's not about your grip on power. It's about what we want as a people. So let's start talking about it that way. I think a lot of this has been because, quite frankly, they've gone too far in terms of going after our kids, man. Parents don't mess around, and you're seeing that. You're seeing the mama bears step up. You're seeing parents go to school board meetings and speak up. Now that we've gotten this EUA for ages 5 to 11 for vaccinations, it's absolutely absurd. And there's already rhetoric about mandating these for kids to go to school in some states, primarily blue states. It's absolutely ridiculous, especially when you take it in conjunction with the fact that if you're a child, your likelihood of having an adverse event due specifically to COVID is basically zero. All right. There are always unhealthy children with comorbidities, et cetera, who, yes, will die if they get COVID or if they get the flu or any number of things. But the fact that you want to enforce vaccination mandates on kids is absolutely absurd, and parents will not stand for that. And that's why you're seeing this huge pushback. You start coming for our kids, and you saw it with Terry McAuliffe when he's just straight up really said the quiet part out loud. I don't think parents should have a say in what's taught in their kids' schools. Good freaking luck, man. And that's the way it should be. You come to me, and my daughter's only 4 years old, but next year, if her school says that even though she has a zero chance basically of having any sort of negative effect from this respiratory disease that's become endemic now, just like the flu and any other common cold, that she's got to get this shot and it's a mandate, I'm going to have some choice words for you. And so I think that's what you're really seeing happening across this nation is like our children are sacred, man. You can't come for our kids like that. And right before my main Instagram account got disabled or banned or whatever you want to call it, I had made a post that said, our kids are our kids, not the government's. And it's kind of funny timing. I don't know if that was the final nail in the coffin as to why I got banned, but I meant it. And that resonated with a lot of people because that is how we feel. Unless you're a parent, you don't truly understand that feeling. Someone wants to do something to your child against their and your will, you will fight. So I think that's a big part of what we're seeing. Other stuff that's going on. Travis Scott concert. You guys have probably seen this. This is insane. I've been getting caught up on all of this stuff that's been going on. I think 8 people have been trampled to death so far. That's the count of folks who have died at this concert. And, the footage is crazy. I saw some footage where a girl or a lady was trying to tell the concert staff that, there's someone dead down here. There's someone dead down here. And they kept pushing her off. And she even tried to grab the cameraman's camera and put it on the person or the people who had been suffocated or trampled or whatever it was. And he still pulled the camera back and was like, leave me alone. Pretty suspect behavior going on. And even despite the fact that they became aware that people had been injured and or dead, they kept on with the concert. Travis Scott kept on for 40 more minutes or something like that. So a lot of really questionable stuff. Obviously, it's very early. A lot of news is still coming out about it. I did see somewhere that I think someone was injecting people randomly with fentanyl or some derivative of fentanyl, and that might have spurred the reaction from the crowd to freak out and start running or trying to run. I think it was too packed to even do that. And it just shows that it can be dangerous in these situations or scenarios where you're packed in with tons of people. One interesting thing that I've noticed, excuse me, I had to get a sip of water there. One interesting thing I've noticed is I think there was 50,000 people here. And oddly, and shoulder to shoulder, packed in like sardines, butts to whatever. I forget the expression. But no talk of COVID, no talk of social distancing or any of that. So it's just interesting to see how the media kind of picks and chooses when they bring up certain issues. Of course, you didn't see any talk of it during the BLM and Antifa riots or anything like that. Because as we found out, the virus is a social justice virus, and it's not going to affect you if you're protesting in the name of woke-isms. So we'll see what happens with Travis Scott concert. This to me is a pretty disgusting example of the phenomenon of diffusion of responsibility when you have large groups, large crowds. You literally have people trampling on top of other people, killing them, and nobody willing to do anything about it and letting it continue on. That is human nature, unfortunately. It's the diffusion of responsibility. When it's a huge crowd like that, you're like, well, someone else will take care of it. It's not my problem. And then that perpetuates and nobody takes care of it. And then you end up with something like this. Also, I read that it looked like 11 people had heart attacks. So clearly they're still looking into that and trying to find out, was it drug-induced heart attacks or was it because of the extreme pressure from the crowd on people's bodies or chests or what have you? But 11 people so far have had heart attacks, which is kind of crazy. You think of that as being probably more of a younger crowd, at least I would think. So to hear they're having heart attacks is pretty crazy. And I'm always looking at the different stuff going on in the world in the context of the hypocrisy of these weird rules we've imposed on ourselves insofar as this mask stuff goes and everything. And I thought it was really interesting to see, for example, with the Travis Scott thing, there was one kid who had been at the concert, and you look at the concert and nobody's wearing masks. They're all packed in, freaking shoulder to shoulder, really packed in there. And then when he does his interview about what happened, and he's like live on the camera, nobody around him, he's got a mask on doing his interview about what happened at the concert. So it's just, everything is arbitrary. Nothing makes sense. People aren't using their brains to think about this stuff. But anyway, COVID, man, it just won't go away. And I mean that literally and figuratively. So it won't go away insofar as the public's dialogue or it's being out there in the milieu or whatever the hell you want to say. But it's also not going away physically. I think that we need to accept the fact that COVID is here to stay. If you're going to live for like 5 more years, you're probably going to get COVID at some point. I think you just need to come to grips with that. COVID is here to stay. It's an endemic disease, I think, at this point. And if you disagree with me, point out a single country globally that has eradicated and kept COVID away permanently thus far. We've had several countries where we thought they did. We had a large province in India, I think, that had all but eliminated it. But, it creeps back and you have surges again. And it's endemic. It's in the population. It's here to stay as far as I'm concerned. And I think that once that paradigm of thinking that we can eradicate this thing shifts to this thing is just here to stay like the flu, at least I hope that we'll lose some of this paranoia, that some of these people who live their lives just full of fear, completely misinformed, ignorant to the facts, haven't taken the time to actually read any sort of actual primary source material or peer-reviewed materials, and they're just listening to what they're being told on CNN and other sources like that, and driving with a mask on, freaking out if somebody else isn't wearing a mask, thinking they need to get 2 shots and then a booster and another booster and another booster, and hand sanitize every second of the day, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, I feel bad for people like that. I truly do. And I would just encourage you, if you're one of those folks, read some. Diversify what you're reading and maybe educate yourself a little bit. And certainly don't shame people or other people who aren't doing the things you're doing or behaving the way you're behaving, because I think eventually one day you're probably, if you're capable of thinking objectively, you're probably going to realize one day that you were being a completely ridiculous asshat when it comes to this stuff and you weren't actually following science. So I bring that up because I saw an interesting statistic, and it really speaks to the I can't talk today, guys. I'm sorry. The politicization, making it political. Good Lord. It really speaks to that because, and I think this was brought up on Bill Maher, and then I actually saw it on Jimmy Dore. He brought it up again, but there was a survey, and I can't remember where the survey was done, but they surveyed Democrats and Republicans about essentially their perceptions of COVID and sort of the state of things as far as COVID goes. And one thing that really stood out, and I hope I got this stat correct, I got this from Jimmy Dore's show on YouTube. 41% of Democrats thought that unvaccinated people were greater than 50% likely to be hospitalized if they contracted COVID. So Democrats were surveyed as about hospitalizations, and 41% of Democrats said that they think that if you're unvaccinated, you have more than a 50% chance of going to the hospital if you get COVID. Or put in other words, greater than 50% of the unvaccinated people who get COVID end up hospitalized. They thought it was greater than half. Greater than half of the unvaccinated people who get COVID, they thought ended up in the hospital. You guys want to know what the actual number is there? Less than 1%. So less than 1% of unvaccinated people who contract COVID end up in the hospital. That's unvaccinated. That shows you how big of a disconnect there is between what people, specifically on the left, Democrats in this case, think, based on the messaging they're receiving from their preferred methods of consuming the news, which is, of course, CNN, MSNBC, etc., what they think versus the truth. And there is a huge divide. And this makes a lot of sense when you think about the fact that they are so reactionary and emotional and driven by fear. And I probably would be too if I believed those were the numbers. But I actually read and educate myself. So almost half, I mean, we're approaching half of Democrats surveyed in this thing thought that if you're unvaccinated and you get COVID, greater than 50% of you are going to be hospitalized. And it's less than 1%. The real number is less than 1%. Okay. Whether you're vaxxed or unvaxxed and you get COVID, it's a less than 1% chance you go to the hospital. Okay. So again, read more, guys. Free your mind, expand your mind, actually look at primary source materials. Don't just trust places like CNN. God, how many times do they have to be caught in lies for you guys to stop trusting them? And Fox too, and MSNBC, and I mean, all of them, mainstream media. Like, you have to diversify where you're getting your news and get the hell out of an echo chamber. Just crazy stuff. 41% thought that greater than 50% of people unvaccinated who got COVID would be hospitalized. And it's truly less than 1%. Wild. All right, so other stuff in the news. They passed that damn infrastructure bill. So they had the votes for it in April. Wanted to wait until they could also pass Build Back Better with it. And you guys, if you've kept up with this, you know that that's been the case. And then Kristen Sinema and Manchin have been the Democrats in opposition to passing Build Back Better because they have some sense of fiscal responsibility. And then finally, they had to just go ahead and pass the infrastructure bill without passing Build Back Better. And it's still something like, God, I don't know, $1.2 trillion for this infrastructure bill. And when you break it down and look at how much of that is being spent on like roads and bridges and all that stuff, it's like 100 and some billion. So then you got to say, well, wait, this is infrastructure, right? So why is only 100 billion of the 1.2 trillion being spent on roads and bridges, et cetera? So I would do a deep dive on that if I were you. I mean, there's some other things in there that are at least tangential to sort of infrastructure projects, but a ton of fluff. I mean, it's really, and it's just such a joke that they act like this money's just going to come out of nowhere and it's not going to impact us. And a crap ton of money that they're spending on really nothing you're going to feel. I'm not going to feel it. You're not going to feel it. And it took 13 Republicans to vote for this. So at a time when Biden and Kamala are just floundering, horrible ratings, horrible approvals, I would say, rather, and Republicans could just sit back and let them keep floundering. Instead, they give Biden the W. They go ahead and 13 of them vote in favor of this. And it's a shame to see because they really gave him a get-out-of-jail-free card on that one. They gave him a win when they should have just twisted the dagger, in my opinion, because this bill wasn't doing shit for us anyway. You're not going to feel it. I'm not going to feel it, like I said. I think there's like something like $200 million extra dollars going to Nancy Pelosi's district just because she deserves it. It's throwing a little extra $200 million for Nance. These people are just so crooked, guys. It's just disgusting. So anyway, that happened. And Biden, who's every week just more and more off his rocker, at the UN climate change conference, you guys have probably seen that there were the rumors that he pooped himself at one point and then was falling asleep, and that's all on video. He's just sitting upright, just completely asleep, and then one of his aides or someone has to come over and wake him up at this extremely important conference where they had to get together to talk about the climate, and they all brought their private jets, and he brought like an 80-some car motorcade, very important to talk about the climate and why we shouldn't burn as many fossil fuels. So let's take the private jet and all these cars over there. But Speaking of emissions, apparently Biden also emitted a bunch of methane out of his butthole. So at a reception for the UN Climate Change Conference in front of the Duchess of Cornwall, Biden ripped one, apparently. And look, I mean, I've farted in public on accident, just kind of let one come out. I know you guys probably have. Like, it happens. We're human. But it's just par for the course, man. It's just par for the course with this guy. And what do you think is going to happen when you have a 78-year-old who's clearly in mental decline, who doesn't know where he is half the time, can't stay awake, can't string together a sentence of coherent words? Yeah, he's going to rip ass in front of people. So apparently the Duchess of Cornwall just can't stop talking about it. She said that it's long and impossible to ignore. His fart was long and impossible to ignore. That is not what she said. She definitely did not say it was long and impossible to ignore. So yeah, that happened. I don't really have anything else to say about that except that's our president, you all. Congratulations to all of you who voted for him. Truly, you're so brave. You're so brave. Look at you changing the world. He's being increasingly combative, which of course he has been the whole time. You know, anytime someone from the press asks him anything less than a complete softball question, he gets defensive and lashes back at him. You know, he was asked about the supply chain issues and instead he goes on, you know, the offensive, sort of attacking the press. I haven't seen any of you describe the supply chain well in your publications. And it's just like, dude, you got to stop, man. And you see a lot of whataboutisms where people will say, well, Donald Trump pushed back on the press and he was always arguing with them and all of that. And, you know, a couple things there. He would stand there and answer their questions for hours, though. And he wouldn't just rip a one-liner and turn around and walk away. I mean, that wasn't what he did. And, I mean, he would sit there and spar with them. So I had appreciation for that. But also, even if that weren't the case, wasn't the whole point of this guy, this Build Back Better Biden, to be better, to be a better example? You know, so the whataboutisms don't really work in this case because the whole reason you wanted to bring this guy in was because he was someone different. He was going to restore respect to the office and decorum and all that, even though he was trying to fight people and calling them fat, you know, on the campaign trail. And of course, the mainstream media covered that stuff up. So you guys probably never saw it because you don't do any research. And he's been that way for the last, 5 decades. But yeah, let's vote him in because he's going to restore respect to the office. Meanwhile, he's fallen asleep. He can't talk. He's farting himself. He's shitting himself. He doesn't know what's happening. So great job, everybody. Great job. And at the same time, trying to enforce absolutely un-American, inhumane mandates on the population. The real irony in all of this is that, well, there's a few things. People actually support this. People are actually so just, I don't know, blind to how terrible it is maybe, or willfully ignorant, but people support these unconstitutional mandates being enforced. Even though Biden said I would never federally enforce mandates for a vaccine that's unconstitutional, it's crazy that people enforce or support enforcing them, but also the same people who called Donald Trump a dictator, which is hilarious because he deregulated a ton. He always deferred to states' rights, even in handling COVID, and he got crap for that. You know, people were giving him crap for leaving it up to the states, but then also calling him a dictator, which is like, try to resolve that cognitive dissonance. But the same people who call Trump a dictator are like worshiping at the feet of Biden. Well, not a lot of them because his approval rating is below 40% now, I think. But there's still people hanging on supporting unconstitutional mandates. If ever there were dictatorial behavior, it's right now. It's what this guy is doing. And it just blows my mind that people can't see that. Anyway, I think that's all I got for you guys. I'm going to go get this workout in. If you haven't already, please make sure you check out the interview that I did with Derek Josie, the fourth generation dairy farmer and one of the farmers in the Tillamook Dairy Farmer Co-op. He's out in Oregon, released that one today. So check out that interview. And as always, guys, if you want to find me, you can reach me at The Free Mind Podcast on Instagram, on Twitter at I am Dave Hurt. And if you're interested in my outdoor content, at Just Work Outdoors, and my lifestyle apparel, all that good stuff that's launching soon, at Just Work Co. And both of those last ones are on Instagram. And then, of course, if you're listening to this, we do also have a YouTube channel, Free Mind Podcast, so check that out. If you'd like to see video versions for whatever reason, we are on YouTube as well. And as always, guys, I appreciate you. Until next time, keep your minds free.